So let us begin with the first part of Book 23. The first point is, what is Penelope's response to her maid's story of Odysseus' return, and how does this add to the climax in the Odyssey? So here, um, one of Penelope's nurses, her servant, goes to Penelope in her bed and tells Penelope to wake up. Quote, "Wake up and see for yourself with your own eyes all you've dreamed of, all your days. He's here, Odysseus. He's come home at last. He's killed the suitors." So, Penelope, after hearing this news, she doesn't believe the nurse. She just believes that the nurse has gone crazy. And, quote here, "Never," the final nurse kept pressing on, "Dear child, I never mock you. No, it's all true." But still, Penelope refuses to believe. So this adds to the climax that Odysseus, his journey, he still not only has to kill the suitors and get home, which he's done, but he also has to make Penelope believe that it's really him. So this kind of adds another realm to this quest. The second point is, what type of feminine is Penelope, and how does this contrast with the feminine in the Iliad? So here, Penelope is really strong and faithful to Odysseus, despite all of the suitors trying to take Odysseus' throne, where the feminine in the Iliad, for example, Andromache, I think, Hector's wife, she's really fearful of everything, where Penelope just remains strong and cunning still. For example, Penelope unweaving a bridal train. The third point is, what is Athena's role in Book 23, and what does this display about Athena's allegiance in the Odyssey? So, right here, Athena helps dress Odysseus for Penelope, and this shows that although Odysseus has kind of killed the suitors, which Athena is kind of about battle, so I can see why she would take interest in that. She's still with Odysseus all the way, so it just shows that it's really Odysseus that she's with, not really just a restoration of Ithaca. So that's kind of interesting about what Athena does, because we never really see gods or goddesses really do this a whole lot. So that wraps it up for the first part of book 23.
Book 23, Part 2. And the first question will be in lines 145 through 157. And the question is, what did Odysseus plan during lines 145 through 157, and what is the meaning of this? So, Odysseus planned a fake banquet because, and he planned a fake banquet, and the meaning of this is that, so everyone in the city, everyone in his city, wouldn't be suspicious of something happening, which was like the massacre happened, and the people in the city wouldn't be suspicious because there would be like a banquet, a party. So the next question, it will be in lines 273 through 277. And the question is, which god elongated the night, and why would he or she do this? So, Athena made the night longer, made the night longer, and she did this so Odysseus and Penelope could spend more time together during the night. And the next question will be in lines 304 through 320, and the question is, who told Odysseus to go to a city where the people have no knowledge of the sea, and why is Odysseus doing this? So, Tiresias told Odysseus that he needs to go to a city where people have no knowledge of the sea, so he can inform them and talk about the sea, and so he can teach them about the sea. And he's making amends to Poseidon. That's why he's doing this, so they can finally have peace between each other, and this will be the last thing he will do. And that will wrap it up for book 23, part 2.
Humanities Alert, bringing you book 24, lines 1 through 199. So I have a bit to get through in this section, so let's get right back into the book. Okay, so what I'm going to tell you first is that there's 3 sections here in book 24. There wasn't much space in terms of content. There was a lot of instead of content, there was a lot of quantity in terms of just long speeches to certain people in the first 200 lines. So these sections, on some part, are very important, but then there are some feeder sections at least. So reference this. I mean, the feeder section would be section 2, definitely. So with that set aside and put out before, let's get right back into it. Okay, so the first section is lines 16 through 102, which I've titled Agamemnon and Achilles, which is basically the reminiscing of Achilles' days with Agamemnon and the Trojan War, and just Agamemnon talking about the major celebrations in honor of Achilles after he's died that they had in uh, with the military men at least, they've had these large celebrations in honor of Achilles and how everyone was sad that he died in the circumstances that he did, knowing that even though before the war he was going to die. It's just this giant crowd or mass of people that were grieving for Achilles, but at the same time honoring and celebrating his achievements and great achievements in war, which I found pretty interesting in terms of the fact that he speaks to Achilles this way now after he's dead, but when they were alive, they had this large feud, as we know in the Iliad, due to Agamemnon's inability to recognize Achilles' divine power and kind of treating him as a secondary. Now, the question I have is, how is Book 24 helpful in the resolution of the Iliad? Which, the way I think it's helpful in the resolution of the Iliad is the fact that there's that, I guess, final send off that you get for Achilles, and the kind of information that surrounds the circumstances of his death, at least. And you get to find out what actually happened to him after the Iliad, since it was not told at the end of the Iliad, at least. And what comedic language is shown in Agamemnon's dialogue is just the large, almost boastful or overly just overly large and excessive celebration of Achilles. I mean, he has major accomplishments in war, but it's almost like 100 or is 110 lines of just Agamemnon's speech to Achilles, or just long talk with Achilles about how great his achievements were and how much everyone missed him, and the recognition of his feats in war, his great feats, is just a large indicator of a comedic epic. This upward movement at the end of the book, at least, in terms of just leveling out everything that happened in the Iliad and talking about it in an upward tone rather than the fact of just the war ending, which was also upward, but just gives you a resolution, at least, to the story of Achilles and the Iliad. The next section is lines 109 through 129, which is I've labeled Agamemnon Reminisces with Ephemedon, which is basically a large or pretty short section just talking about how Agamemnon and Ephemedon were during the Trojan War and how great of a man he is. Now, what I find pretty interesting about this is what he talks about him about is how great and honorable he was, and how like much of a shame it is that he was struck down in the prime of his life after he'd come home from war, and how a great man, what a great man he was. And you get this kind of split reality from what the reader sees in terms of his attempts to court Odysseus' wife, and just eating him out of house at home, and kind of using Odysseus' resources while he was gone, and saying it was okay, and it was like how this doesn't equate whatsoever to what we read Agamemnon's description of Phemidon versus what we read throughout the book. It just doesn't equate, so you get this kind of split reality, which I find pretty interesting. Now, the last section, which is very, very important, lines 130 through 200, which it's a kind of a larger reference to that split reality. So I've labeled it Tales of the Wicked Penelope and Odysseus, which pretty much just says that Penelope and Odysseus are terrible, terrible people that planned the deaths of so many suitors by luring them into this trap and then slaughtering them. Now, there's this very, very large Homeric simile to Penelope being sort of a wicked spider. The exact words in it are, she ran to weave, in weaving fine spun yarns endless, and she would lead us on, young men, my suitors, now that King Odysseus is no more. She, by the way, this is things that Penelope clearly didn't say, but Phemidon is just coming up with to tell Agamemnon, which I found pretty interesting. Basically, it says, young men, my suitors, now that King Odysseus is no more, go slowly, keen as you are to marry me, until I can finish off this web. So basically just relating this entire incident to some web or trap for these flies, or the flies are, I guess it would be the suitors in this case, like setting a trap for until Odysseus returns so she can, kind of kill them off. But really what you get with this split reality is because it really shows you how different Phemidon's perception is, because considering what we read and then what he's telling Agamemnon, it's just this ridiculous story about how this was a elaborate trap set by Penelope and Odysseus just to slaughter innocent men for no reason. Now, it's basically relating to Penelope's this evil, evil, wicked person, just waiting, just planning and waiting for the death of all these suitors. And I find this very interesting because he talks about the death of these men, about how they put up a very great fight, and how Odysseus intentionally just went out of his way to viciously slaughter these people who had done nothing, but really they had done something very significant, disrespecting his house and home and trying to marry his wife while he was gone. And the things they said to him as a beggar, which I find very interesting, they said these terrible, terrible remarks to him, and he acts like those were nothing, and they were slaughtered innocently. I find this just extremely interesting, and it's a very large part of this last chapter, or book 24, in terms of the fact that you get this consistently throughout a lot of the Greek epics. You get the split reality of what happened or what actually happened, and then two different characters' accounts of it. This is the end of my book section of book 24, lines 1 through 199. Thank you for listening. So let's get right back into the book with the next section.
In book 24, lines 200 through 398, there are three key questions about this passage. The first one is, who tells Agamemnon how the suitors died? And why does Agamemnon honor Penelope even if she didn't show glory by killing any of the suitors? So in lines 197 through 209, it was actually, in fact, Amphinomus talking to Agamemnon about how they died. And in lines 210 through 214, Agamemnon honors Penelope, and he did that because she stayed loyal to her husband, which is something that Agamemnon's wife didn't do. She in fact killed him as soon as he got home. Another reason is that she showed a great cleverness by doing the test with the bow, and that makes her equal to someone with great strength. The second key question is, what does Odysseus do to his father, And why might Odysseus need to test his father before he reunites with him? So in lines 238 through 240, Odysseus says, "And I will put my father to the test, see if the old man knows me now on sight or fails to after 20 years apart." And why might Odysseus need to test his father before he reunites with him? I believe that testing him is unnecessary, and that he has been so accustomed to doing it to the Phaeacians, to his wife, and even to Athena. So he just became used to doing it. And the third question is, how does Odysseus reuniting with his father show comedic language? As you know, comedic language includes three elements. That is disguise, feminine, and amending of the oikos. And the comedic language it shows is amending of the oikos, because oikos means family, and Odysseus amended his family because his father and son has been separated for over 20 years, and they just now reunited.
I was hoping it would never come, but here we are at the end of Book 24. Starting on line 396, I'd like to discuss Odysseus and his father feasting, and how this contributes to the comic of the epic. So, I think this is an important passage where Telemachus takes the two herdsmen to go carve the sides of meat and mix the ready wine, because I feel like it's important that this comic should end on an upward motion of Odysseus and his father reuniting, as well as Odysseus and his son. Later, lines 461 through 464, again contributing to the upward motion and the restoration of the polis, is the suitors' burial rites, and I think it's important that the bodies of the suitors are sent back to their families and given a proper burial, because even though these people were very much against Odysseus and what he stood for, Odysseus grants them the what he considers is basically a burial. And finally, on line 531, a final intervention of the gods, Zeus's final decree. And Zeus says, when Athena probes him, to do as his heart desires, but that there's one way it should be done. Odysseus has had his revenge, and both sides should seal their pacts and let him reign for life. So, therefore, Odysseus will continue to be the ruler of Ithaca, and peace will be restored in the land.